depending on where in Latin America you are. Thank you for being here with us in this first regional seminar of Publicis Sapient, and this started in April on 2023. My name is Mauricio Sanzano. I'm the Director for Utilities in Latin America. We have an excellent participants from Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Peru, and Mexico. So, all of the topics, the trends, and platform that we are going to talk about the trading of commodities and the risk management as well. And this type of portfolio is a topic that is not only interesting but necessary and absolutely current in all of the places in the world. And for this, we have expert speakers of Publicis Sapient that are going to help us to have a joint view of Practia and Publicis Sapient, the challenges and or trends in Latin America, the capabilities and platforms that will sustain this, and how we can collaborate. And we are going to have a wrap-up session and Q&A as well. So this is the agenda of the webinar that we will have today. As a first mention, we're going to have a Publicis Sapient and Praxia presentation, then market trends, then TRM capabilities and packages. Then we are going to talk about how we can help, and then the wrap-up and Q&A session. So now we have a Will Dusek, an Associate Manager Director of Publicis Sapient, Mark Alger. He is a Manager Director of Publicis Sapient, and Mudit Kapoor, who is an agent of commodities in Publicis Sapient, who are going to take over this presentation. During the entire event, you can go to the chat of the webinar in your language of preference, and those will be answered at the end of the Q&A session. Will, all yours.
Thanks, Mauricio. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Will Dusick, and I'm one of the leaders of the strategy and consulting practice for energy and commodities here at Publicis Sapient. Today, I'll be providing you with an overview of our market trends. Before we do that, I'd like to start with a brief introduction of our firm, Publicis Sapient. Next slide, please. Publicis Sapient is the digital business transformation arm of Publicis Group, a global technology and media company. Publicis Group has almost 100,000 employees worldwide, of which Publicis Sapient has 24,000, 1,000 of which have recently joined us from Practia. With offices across the globe, we've been helping transform clients in the energy and commodities sector, as well as many other industries, for more than 3 decades. We're consistently recognized as a leading consulting firm in the markets we serve, but our greatest recognition is the longstanding relationships with the clients we serve, a few of which are listed here on the right. Next slide, please. Trading and risk management is a major focus of our energy and commodities practice. We have more than 1,000 energy domain practitioners serving major clients across the globe, and we've led over 1,000 projects across all major commodity groups, both financial and physical, including relatively new ones, such as emissions and hydrogen. In addition to our legacy focus on the design and implementation of TRM platforms, we also serve supply and trading clients across the consulting spectrum, from strategy to execution, in areas such as growth strategy, operating model transformation, and data strategy and governance. With that, I'd like to now turn to market trends. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. So global energy markets are becoming increasingly complex and experiencing unprecedented levels of volatility, particularly since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, which saw significant impacts on demand and supply disruptions. We believe volatility will continue to be a major driver and present supply and trading organizations with opportunities for years to come due to several factors driving market uncertainty. In the short term, energy supply has been constrained due to years of underinvestment. It's growth challenged by the financial impacts of the energy transition and rising inflation as well. Regulatory uncertainty exists in all markets, but is especially relevant in Latin America, where recent elections are causing governments to revisit policies and could open the door to more global trade from the region. Geopolitical unrest in Europe and the Middle East has exacerbated supply chain disruptions and reinforced the demand shift that began during the pandemic. It led many countries to enact policies and seek new trade partners to ensure critical resources are not exported at the expense of energy and food security. We've seen all this play out by the impact of the war in Ukraine, driving up natural gas prices as Europe tried to backfill for gas no longer coming from Russia. This had a knock-on impact for other commodities like coal, as well as products like fertilizer, which is tied to natural gas prices and ended up being a major driver in the increase in food costs. Looking out a little further, new energies and new energy markets are rapidly emerging and changing the commodity landscape, leading value chains to converge as food increasingly becomes a feedstock for transportation fuel and metals that are critical components of EV batteries and transmission networks. Also, the need to balance profitability and emissions will lead to more active trading of emission credits. However, with complexity and volatility comes a unique opportunity to create value for supply and trade organizations who can manage the risk and act quickly to enter new markets and capture arbitrage across the value chains. Next slide, please. So here we show how global energy flows are expected to change over the next 30 years. And it's a really dramatic shift. The next 30 years are likely to witness not only changes in primary supply, but across the industry life cycle and how energy and materials are sourced, traded, transported, and eventually consumed or transformed into end products. Fossil fuels will continue to play an important role despite renewable sources continuing to gain market share. The expected rise in electricity generation and electrification of entire supply chains is the most obvious shift, and that's the blue that you see really taking over between 2018 and 2050 on this graph. And the ripple effect across energy and commodity supply chains is going to be significant, creating many opportunities for players in both the assets and trading space. And all of these changes aren't going to come at once. There's going to continue to be instances where supply outpaces demand and vice versa. And that's going to create those opportunities I've mentioned around supply and trading organizations, opportunities to optimize across the value chain, get into parts of the value chain that are going to really see a lot of tightness in the market. And for companies that have optionality built into their assets, they're going to be well positioned to take advantage of these market dislocations that are going to happen throughout the transition. Let's go to the next slide. So looking more closely at Latin America, we see that renewables is going to penetrate the market quite a bit over the next 50 years. Fossil fuels are going to lose share to these renewable energies, primarily wind and solar PV, and also make the region a little less reliant on hydropower. Nevertheless, fossil fuels are going to continue to have a role supplying the region's needs. Looking at the impacts of the different commodities, oil is going to see declining overall production, but new discoveries are expected, and the region should actually gain share of production globally with these new offshore discoveries. Venezuela remains a question mark. Will it put in the necessary investments and reforms to be a major player in global markets or continue down its current path? There's also going to be an opportunity to invest downstream and meet regional demand for products rather than shifting raw materials elsewhere to be converted into final products. Regardless of all of these things, local production is going to continue to be under pressure to find a home in increasingly competitive end markets as demand for fossil fuel wanes. Moving on to natural gas, production will increase, led by Argentina. And the big question remains, is it going to be enough to turn the region into a net exporter of natural gas? And that's going to depend on how much local demand is created. Given this uncertainty, infrastructure investment will be key. And concerns about unutilized capacity or stranded LNG assets may hamper the region's ability to fully utilize this resource. On the electricity front, renewables will continue to displace oil and coal to meet demand. Natural gas could provide a low-emission source of dispatchable backup, provided the infrastructure exists to transport gas from production areas to generators. However, this new generation mix can accelerate the development of a robust power trading market across Latin America, since the different sources of generation are somewhat complementary. Different regions have peak renewable demand supply available in different times of day, as well as different seasons of the year. And that provides an opportunity for regions to trade with each other to offset the imbalances of supply when they occur. As far as minerals go, there's going to be large quantities of them needed for the energy transition, and that's good news for Latin America. Lithium, copper, rare earth elements are all primary components of lots of the infrastructure that will be needed in the transition, including EV batteries, electricity network components, wind turbines, and hydrogen electrolyzers. And there's also going to be opportunities to invest in refining and transformation of the minerals to create value-added products locally rather than importing them back into the region. Like investments in the downstream oil sector, this would have the added benefit of creating more jobs. And finally, in agriculture, biofuel mandates will continue to drive local demand and exports of crops, which can be used as feedstocks. And the convergence of these food, feed, and fuel value chains means that fundamentals will be continue to be driven by competition from different end markets going forward. Let's go to the next slide. So to manage the business going forward, we see trading organizations having to enhance existing capabilities and invest in new ones. And we think these four are critical capabilities to be thinking about. The ability to manage dynamic commercial exposure will be key as value chains become more complex and volatile. Companies will need to invest in technologies, processes, and capabilities to understand where the exposures lie, and the ability to do this in near real time will be key to managing risk and capturing opportunities. The ability to capture and analyze data quickly will continue to be a big differentiator also. Making sure you have the right data governance and infrastructure in place will be important, as well as investing in tools like machine learning and AI to analyze data quickly. And data analysis isn't just restricted to in-house data. The ability to analyze market signals from external data, including social media, could give supply and trading organizations a leading edge when it comes to capturing value ahead of the competition. And finally, companies will need to invest in new products and markets to capture a larger share of value being created by all this uncertainty. They will also require companies to revisit their operating model to ensure it's structured to provide supply and trading organizations with the agility to act quickly and collaboratively to make decisions that optimize value across each company's asset portfolio. Next slide, please. Supply and trading will remain a core component of commodity companies going forward, and each company will need to look at the bigger strategic picture to get the full value from the opportunity. We see this taking place in the 5 areas presented on the screen. Data and analytics, which is at the core of getting the right information to the right people at the right time to make the right decisions. TRM, which is putting in place a robust tool set, including packages and custom applications to efficiently and effectively provide core trade capture and risk management solutions. Ecosystem modernization, building a modular platform designed to leverage best-of-breed applications rather than relying on a single piece of software to service all your commercial needs. Supply chain digitization, building use cases to improve workflows such as automated processing and cloud-based data collection. And finally, new models and new commodities trading, strategically investing in the capabilities, assets, and markets to capture more value. We're working with clients across the globe every day to invest in these capabilities to reduce complexity, increase scalability, and enable rapid decision-making. That completes my section on market trends. Now I'll hand you over to Mark, who's going to talk about TRM capabilities and packages.
Thank you, Will. Appreciate it. I'm Mark Alger. I'm going to talk a little bit more. I'm going to shift gears and talk more into details around what the TRM packages look like, what capabilities they have. And then lastly, start talking about how do we successfully define the right solution for you and what that implementation and beyond kind of looks like. So with that, I'll start off with the capabilities. And let's first talk, if we flip the slide, Shrikant. We'll start talking about the value chain. And for different organizations, if you're a huge integrated international player, you may play in all the value chain. But just to give you some ideas, you'd start somewhere in exploration and production. Is it energy production? Is it coal? Are you looking at farming for agriculture? Are you doing the exploration? All those types of things where you're producing the raw products, if you will, that are coming out of the ground that will feed the whole system. As you get from the raw products or exploration and production, you're really getting, then you start to ship it, you start to move it, you have the logistics, and logistics can be pipelines or trucks or rail cars or marine. You're also storing it, you're doing all those type of things, and that's where a lot of the trading of the raw materials, be it crude oil or coal or whatever, that'll take place between those logistics, between that production, and really that first manufacturing or processing step. And that processing step, when you bring those products, those raw products, into a refinery to be turned into refined products, or you're bringing coal in and maybe you're blending it, or you're using it for power gen or natural gas. You may be taking through that. You'll go through the processing to separate the liquids and those kinds of things, or you may even be doing biofuels, or you're doing some kind of corn crushes and things like that. And this is where a lot of the crack spreads, the corn crush, the spark spreads, and all those things that we manage from a trading perspective have to take place in this manufacturing processing. Essentially, finished products come out of that. Once again, you're moving those products around. You have power, obviously, you bring in transmission or electricity, and you still have storage, and you have pipelines and trucks and rail cars and marine and those kind of things. And typically that will go, or many times that'll go into some type of terminaling or storage. And that terminaling storage, if it's natural gas, could be a liquefaction plant, so you can turn to LNG your gas into LNG, so you can supply the Asia Pacific markets, um, or the European markets, or whatever you're planning to do. There's not a lot of energy storage out there, but some energy storage is starting to come into play. But also all of that rack terminal activity. So you got your fuel system, and it's how you get into that wholesale market. And ultimately, then you've got, again, the wholesale logistics and trading and those type of activities to eventually get it to your final customer, the consumer that's actually going to consume it, be it retail, commercial, industrial, residential activities. And again, your organization will play in some of these, may not play in all of them, but you're playing in different spaces. And you think about it, depending on what space you're playing, the capabilities of the TRM packages really apply regardless of the commodity, right? Obviously, as you get into scheduling, as you get into the markets and the pricing mechanisms and those things, they're different. But overall, you need a lot of the same capabilities to manage that. And that's what the TRM packages are trying to provide, be it contract management and be able to manage those different contracts and logistics, those kind of things, or trading and capturing the different types of trades or the leases, your production, your purchase orders or sales orders and those types of things, as well as all your financial instruments you use for hedging and those kind of. So if you're also interacting with the ICE exchange or some of the different exchanges to trade both physical and financial instruments, all that capture, all that management, all that settlement, all those types of things that are related to it. And then of course across the bottom, as you start trading, you're managing your overall exposure both to the market, to your the counterparties, and those kind of things, as well as you're managing the P&L. You're looking at intraday positions. Obviously, when you start getting into power, you maybe even get a day ahead, hourly type of trading, those kinds of things. We talk about electricity, and then you manage kind of your end of day, your broker reconciliations, those kind of things. Scheduling is where it gets really interesting, because scheduling gets very unique based on the commodity and the type of logistics, be it marine or pipeline or truck or rail. There's quite differences between those, and different packages have strengths and weaknesses, if you will, for how you manage these different pieces. And be it if you're managing volume or megawatts or weight-based products or ags or minerals or whatever you're trying to manage, those things are different. That's where scheduling, it's very unique depending on what commodities and logistics you're applying. As you go to risk management, we start managing the risk of either the market risk and looking at my overall position and my value at risk that I have, and those type of things, as well as my credit risk with I have with customers, either my risk or my counterparty's risk to me. You're managing those with your value at risk tools, with your P&L tools, with your different exposure management. And this is also obviously where you come into play, where you start putting controls in place, making sure you have risk limits and monitoring, trader sign-offs, those kind of things, to make sure that the value you have sitting at risk is managed at the right level that is appropriate for your organization. And this will tie back to your risk policy and those kinds of activities. Okay. Now, lastly, you got to get all the washout. You got to make sure you can You can settle everything correctly. You can invoice things. You can pay what you need to pay. You can collect what you need to collect. You got all the GL transactions and the cash management and the corporate, all those accounting activities. And this is where the ETRM systems are, different ones are really strong at different places. And of course, then they're also integrating in with your ERP system and some of those things. And if you think about these capabilities, the TRM is not just all one only package. This is the only thing I do. It needs to fit into an overall ecosystem. And we want to look at different tools. And if I click the next slide, if you will, I kind of get highlighted. These are some of the areas where we see typically where other tools are going to be integrated in with your TRM package. We don't want to go in and try to make TRM everything and try to customize everything, because then I'll never be able to upgrade after I do my initial go live. Okay, we want to make sure that it's working with some combination of other third-party tools. There's a tight integration. Obviously, if you're talking to the exchanges, if you're talking to the different brokers and things like that, you got data coming in and out. There's also specialty tools, especially around scheduling. If you're managing your docks and your ports and your vessel leases and your rail car leases, or your transmission activities, and your scheduling around the power local distribution companies and those things, there might be some uniqueness tied to those things, and we want to make sure we capture the best of breed and we integrate at the right level. So we're trying to make sure we have an overall solution that gives you the value you want to get out of this whole piece. And this just gives you some idea of where we kind of see a lot of that type of activity. Certainly, if you have credit risk, you want to make sure that that's a global credit risk for your entire company, not just for your TRM activities and those kind of things. So that's where we probably integrate in with some type of more corporate credit or those kind of things that happen. Anyway, now let me shift over. Let's talk a little about the packages themselves. Go to the next slide, if you would. This might be hard for you guys to see, but the different TRM systems, they have strengths and they got challenges, as I mentioned. What commodities you are trying to manage, what logistics capabilities you have, and what your target operating model, that's going to derive what the right TRM solution is. As I mentioned before, it's really that TRM solution and how it fits into your overall ecosystem of your different tools that will manage the different pieces of the puzzle, if you will. What we've done, though, from a TRM standpoint is we tried to show you, at least from a commodity standpoint, and these different grids show you kind of who are the different TRM players that are in these spaces that have the ability to do crude and refined products. Which ones are kind of the leaders for crude refined, which ones are the contenders, which are the participants, versus natural gas, versus ags and softs, versus coals and metals, versus electricity, natural gas liquids, carbon. Because some tools are very good with liquid hydrocarbons. Other tools are good with things like energy and that kind of stuff. Other things are more gas oriented. But depending if, and some of that may make sense if you're in North America, you have very heavy natural gas pipeline business, which is very regulated. It's got intra and inter state pipelines and trying to manage all those activities. First, your ags and those things and how you're going to try to manage those pieces. So the different tools have different strengths and they play in that space. And you'll see, depending on what customer we have, we may be looking at a different set of tools and say, oh, well, you're doing this, this, and this. Therefore, the best tool is this fit. Okay. In some cases, there's some people have different, tools for different pieces of it. But in general, if you want, if you have just liquid hydrocarbons, you might be looking at an ions right angle product versus if you have liquids and you have gas and you have power, you might be looking at their Endure product or Allegros product or something like that. So picking the right package and how it fits in your ecosystem is a critical piece of making sure we get the right answer implemented for you that not only fits what you're doing right now, but where you plan to go. And we can talk more about this if you guys want to have more discussions later. Go to the next slide, if you will. So let's talk about how do I get the right solution, and then how do I implement it in the right place? Okay. And there's two different sections here on the left and right. But overall, if you want to be successful on a TRM implementation, the earlier in the life cycle and having the right alignment, the right focus is the most critical. If you think about on the left-hand side, how do we get the right solution? How do we make sure we have the right solution? And that's really falls into these four different categories. And really what we say is first, we need to make sure we have a complete understanding of our business context. What physical assets, what markets are we in? How do we trade? What are we doing? Okay, so what are all those different things that we do? Be it our logistics assets versus our processing assets versus our production assets, all those activities, make sure we have a good understanding how that works, how the markets that they play in work, right? Because some markets are very um, you know, third party trading and that type of activity. Other markets are very governmental organizations, and you have to manage all those pieces of it. How you manage leases for third parties versus government agencies and things like that. They're all different depending on what country you're in, what logistics you have, what type of contracts you have. Secondly, we need to make sure we understand the target operating model, how we manage things. What is our overall P&L framing? How do we segment our business to make sure we can look at what value? How do we think about how I want to say how much, how do I want to evaluate, if you will, my different lines of business and those different business segmentations? And that P&L framing and book structure and all that is how do those different entities work with each other? How do they trade between each other and how do I break things apart? That's all part of this overall target operating model and making sure that we have the right segregation of duties, roles, and responsibilities, how everybody works, and say this desk can hold this desk holds this risk. These are the guys that execute on it. These are the different delegation of authority I'm willing to give to these different places in this overall piece. Sorry, my camera went off. And then we get into the business model. So what we do is once we understand the context, the target operating models, we create business scenarios, these end-to-end scenarios that say, hey, my business breaks down into these 5, 6, 10, depending on how big you are, different scenarios. And this is how, and if it's the exports of LNG to Asia Pacific, or it is supplying electricity for the local distribution companies of the different cities within my country, or if it's something of natural gas and supplying either the little DCs or some other pieces of it, I'm producing it. I've got refining, I've got refined products and all those pieces. We build those different models, and these models are critical because that's what we hand over when we're evaluating our different TRM vendors. We say, hey, this is the business we're in. These are the scenarios we expect you to show us. So when we start talking to those TRM vendors, we say, I want you to show me how that your tool is going to help me manage this scenario and this scenario and this scenario. And that's how we make down to, hey, what's the right solution for us and what is the right package for us, as well as how we're going to have these little gap applications that cover different pieces where that particular tool or would have challenges. And we're trying to get the right tool for us. So that's part of that selection process, if you will, of making sure we have the right solution and we have the right framework of how we go forward. Now, once we know what we're going to do, how we get it implemented correctly, I'll move over to the second half of the slide on the right. Okay. If you're going to get a good transformation of the TRM, and you have to address the intersection between the business and the system. If you look at it and you say, okay, there's business processes and scope, there's volumetric flow, there's financial flow, and the TRM package has its functionality, its volumetric flow, how it wants to flow. The TRM, and people always ask me, well, should we, go in and say, I'm going to just use the out of the box functionality? Great way of thinking. I don't want to do a bunch of customizations. I don't want to do all this. But if you go down that path and say it's going to be 100%, I'm not going to customize it, I'm not going to do anything to address how the business flow, you're going to miss the target of getting the value you want out of it, because the default product behavior will create adoption challenges. People won't use it. They'll still go back to spreadsheets because it really is not addressing their total needs. And again, we don't want to customize TRM packages because it makes it hard to implement, but we want to make sure we implement these modular tools in and out of those things and make sure we have the whole piece. If I go the other side and say, I want you to just implement exactly my current processes the way I do business right now, I don't want to go through any transformation, just do that. Then you end up on the other side and you miss the target on the left, and you're saying, okay, now I got a heavily customized solution, right? That only is good for me, that I can't upgrade. It makes it more difficult, and your cost factors are going to go up. So making sure the marriage of those two pieces come together with the organization, the change management, as well as the TRM functionality, this is all part of our methodology trying to address how we do that to make sure you're in that success factor. So let's talk about the next phase, the implementation phase, and what it typically looks like. Go to the next slide. Here you go. As I mentioned before, the inception, that's how do we get to the right tool set? What does the solution look like? It's a TRM package. It's these 6 other tools. They're all going to integrate together. They're going to work with my ERP system, be it if it's SAP or PeopleSoft or some other ERP system, how all those pieces. So defining that, the target operating model, the business scenarios, the key design items, how we all fit that. And eventually we kick it off. And you talk about then we get into build and test like any other project. And we could either be following a waterfall approach or an agile approach, whatever you're most comfortable with. We got to figure what fits with the business, what fits with your existing processes and tools. And then, of course, we're designing and building both the customization. Most when you talk about TRM, it's a package. You're configuring it. You're not necessarily building a lot, but you are building interfaces and reports and those kind of things that match your capabilities, as well as we're making sure that the change management and the training and all that stuff is kind of built up as we go. And in our methodology, there's a lot of heavy user involvement through the entire design phase, so that there's no surprises at the end. It's not like we go off to a closet somewhere and say, okay, we're going to build all this stuff. We think we know your business, and we're going to come back and hopefully during user acceptance, you like it. Success happens with the involvement very early in this cycle. Eventually, you do have the user acceptance testing, and you launch it and you implement it. And everybody, we have a big party and we say, okay, great, the system's up and running, and that's all great. But the reality is, we're not going to get the value at that point. The value comes afterwards, and the transition to your local support and making sure that the local folks all have the right tools and that we have right people. We keep the project team in play and what we call hypercare. So make sure that we are there addressing any issues, especially as you get through those first 1, 2, 3 accounting closes and making sure everything ties out. We can get all the P&L, all the gaps that we haven't found, things that we didn't anticipate are all fixed during this hypercare thing. But also depending on what your support model is, if we're going to help you support it, you're going to have your local team do it. They're all integrated into this overall process, because you're going to get the real value, if you will, in the TRM package and in your overall solution, really after you go live. That's when you have to make sure you can start addressing, you can start putting things in the backlog. Back to Will was saying, hey, now you have data quality. Now you have some of the data controls and quality that you had. Now you can start creating better decision-making tools. You can start looking at better forecasting tools, things that will actually start making money. And ultimately, that's what we want to get to, right? So that support model, that backlog, that continue to kind of enhance the overall solution, if you will, and make sure we're implementing the right tools and the right mechanisms to get the greatest value for your organization. That's what we're going for. So with that, I'm going to transition over to Mudit, and he's going to kind of continue the conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, I'm Mudit. I'm responsible for the energy business of Publicis Sapient. If you can go to the next slide. Having worked with energy clients for more than 20 years, I understand the importance of the role that supply and trading plays and the importance of managing risk well, especially in volatile markets. This likely is a very important and core part of your organization. It is also likely that's a very complex area that requires a very strong understanding of the business function, the associated business processes, and the systems that support business users, traders, schedulers, accountants who work typically in the trading and risk domain, right? And that is where Publicis Sapient stands out. We are uniquely placed to work alongside you in this area. And you may ask why. So for 3 primary reasons: our experience, our expertise, and our local presence. For many years, we have worked successfully with clients in energy across the energy value chain. We have experience across the entire value chain, as you can see from the visual on the top left. And more importantly, how the pieces are connected, right? Like how the upstream production feeds manufacturing, processing, refining, how that in turn feeds like fuel retail, like on the oil and gas side, similarly from generation to transmission and distribution, and ultimately, retail sales on the electricity side, right? We understand how those pieces are connected, and more importantly, the role of trading and risk in this entire value chain, right? That experience comes with very strong expertise. We track the market trends and what it means for our clients across the world. And now, very strongly looking at those of what it means for clients in different regions. We'll spoke about some of that earlier in this presentation. The trading and risk area requires many different capabilities to come together and work well, as Mark mentioned in his section of the presentation. And we have experts in those capabilities. And given that we work with participants across the trading ecosystem, as you can see from that visual on the bottom left, be it oil and gas, majors, midstream operators, merchants, distributors, regulators, banks who are providing a lot of financing and sometimes participating in these markets, we bring a very unique 360 perspective in this area, right? And lastly, local presence. We know it is important to work closely with clients co-located with you and your teams in this area. And now with our presence in LATAM, we feel we are very well placed to assist you across the full life cycle, be it ETRM consulting, ETRM solution delivery, or ETRM support, right? So if you're thinking about doing work in the trading and risk area, we'd love to have an opportunity to talk to you, right? Be it looking at the maturity of landscape, relook at your target operating model as you navigate energy transition. You're looking at picking a package, selecting a package, and doing a TRM implementation, greenfield, evaluating, upgrading your package, deploying your TRM landscape on the cloud, or just looking at more effectively supporting your TRM applications and infrastructure, right? Those are all areas where we have the experience, expertise, like I said, and teams ready to work alongside you. This is a big focus and a big part of our energy business. We worked for many years in this space, and we'd love to have a conversation and follow up with you after this presentation. With that, let me hand it back to Mauricio for the final segment today.
Thank you, Mudit. Thank you very much. Bueno, voy a volver al español.
So I'm going to start talking in Spanish once again. Well, Mark and Murit, thank you so much for this presentation. I'm going to try to have a brief summary. So after that, we can start with the Q&A session that we have and the Q&A session. So I think
vale la pena hacer un repaso
it is worth mentioning an initial thing that while Will said, this is the context that somehow is determining the business opportunity that we are visualizing from Practia and Publicis Sapient in this particular discipline of trading and risk management in commodities, in particular in energy commodities. So precisely at the beginning, Will showed the future context and the impact that this could have in Latin American countries. The first thing that I mentioned is something that we know very well, which is uncertainty, but in a positive thing. This is going to create market conditions that will generate business opportunity, in particular volatility in the prices of commodities that we will experiment in the region in the next years. On the other side, something very interesting is that in the slide that Will showed the flows of offer and demand of primary energy and secondary energy, those flows are changing and they are changing dynamically. We have new energy positioning, for example, renewable ones, and the world forecasts a rising demand of this type of commodities. So the other phenomenon is about the electrification, and maybe this is underlining the slides that Will presented at the beginning, that we also see that in our daily lives, in mobility, in our homes, etc. And the pressure to reduce our carbon footprint and the great actor as transition energy, which is natural gas. And Latin America is a rich region when we talk about mineral resources and natural gas, conventional and unconventional, crude, onshore and offshore, and commodities of the agriculture or that business. So all of these commodities that the world is going to require in a growing manner in the future, in a close future. So our view is that this trading and commodities business will continue growing. And for these organizations have two big challenges. They need to adapt their capabilities that Mark and Will were talking about, Murid as well, and then to transform yourselves. Certain transformations are really necessary in trading for companies, and that transformation is leveraged in three axes. First, data and artificial intelligence. Will and Mark highlighted that. So this is going to be the differentiating aspect for volatility. The differentiator is basically going back to the concept of, in some way, the organizations of trading that the information, that correct one at the right moment in the hands of the right person. And artificial intelligence as an enabler and a help in order to manage complex deals that have many agents that are intervening from different cultures, and where we need a global view of that deal because the structure of that is complicated per se in these volatile markets. The second leveraging aspect that we see in the transformation that is necessary in trading and risk management is about commercial agility
los procesos de
and
trabajo.
to modernize the work processes. And that was really good when Mark was talking about the capabilities of supply chain. And after that, digitalization in the activities of the supply chain of these commodities. So, in that context, where we require a transformation, organizations are looking at those processes of provisioning for commodities. And Mark talked about that with some very interesting aspects. The first one that is really clear in that slide where we saw the process and the different capabilities. And clearly, trading that we are going to be facing is not only negotiating prices and dispatches. This is going to require more complexity. The second thing is that we saw that many of these activities need an support of applications, and the platforms of TRM will have a coverage and a wide support, particularly on the supply chain process of commodities. Well, the type of commodities that you are going to commercialize and the capacities that you have in terms of logistics, the operational market, that is the goal one from Publicis Sapient, we think it is important to consider before making the decision of which platform, technological one, we are going to implement in order to support this discipline. And when Mark talked about the implementation, what he said is first, the implementation, a successful one, will start by aligning the business model with the operational model, with the logistics model and capabilities as well. But then it requires to align businesses and IT in order to finish executing that transformation. And the other point that I think it's really important to highlight is that organizations tend to set a goal, even those of technology, they tend to set goals for the go live of a platform. And that is just the starting point of the process of the value generation for a TRM platform in an organization. So, Publicis Sapient Latam, this is Publicis Sapient and Practia, in order to bring this experience in everything related to TRM, to trading and risk management, to Latin America, with an integral view, this end-to-end view that you can see in the slide of the entire process, and also with the capability of local support on site when that is required. But the approach that we are proposing is one that should not be 100% consultative, but also this should be an approach from accompanying by doing. So we talk about the do experience. The alignment between operations is a clear necessity.
Hay prácticas, hay
But this is not just a
métodos de
statement.
gestión
We have methods, we have expertise that should be combined, and we need to use in order for that to truly happen in the operation. And we need to monetize that business. And for that, for those that would like to take one initial leap, we are going to accompany you with two immediate actions. Short term, but with high impact. We have the maturity assessment is to have a maturity assessment of the current situation to define the target business model and to collaborate in the definition of operation, a business that should go hand in hand with that business. And also, from our side, from our view, we need to have a focalized training fast track that will help us to improve the capabilities of the organization in this particular discipline. Well, truly, I would like to once again thank all of the people that took part of this webinar for giving us this hour. In some of the countries, this is just during lunch. And during this week, there are before the annual exercises, and we have very complicated agendas. So, for you to take the time to listen to an innovative view and a different one on the challenges, the trends, and technological platforms in the world of trading and commodities, and in particular energy ones. And from now, once again, I would like to thank Muriel, Mark, and Will for the excellent presentation and for your willingness to participate in the preparation of this webinar. And now we are going to start with the final part that we have in the agenda. We are going to see this 15 minutes of the webinar where we will have a Q&A session, those that you put in the chat. So for this,
Voy a ir con la primera pregunta. Las voy a
I'm
ir
going to start with the first question. I'm going to read them in English. So which one of you can listen that in the room where you are seeing the webinar?
The first question will go, I think, for Will, maybe. The question says, based on your experience, what is the main problem faced by a TRM area in an oil and gas company when starting the transformation process, and how have you dealt with it from Publicis Sapient? I know
Thanks, Mark.
you.
Yes, I'm on. All right, thanks. Yeah, I'll take that question from a business perspective, and then maybe Mark can add on from a technology perspective. But transformation's hard, and one of the hardest things about it is making sure that the business is ready for that transformation. And that means that the leadership has to be on board. There's got to be a vision, and they've got to have people involved in that transformation every step of the way. You can't outsource transformation to the IT department. You can't outsource transformation to consultants. You've got to lead it from within the business itself. And that means be really thinking about what the future holds, what capabilities you need, how you need things to work, what information that you need at a timely manner, and feeding that information to the team that's going to be leading the transformation going forward. So, for how we dealt with that in the past is working. We've worked very closely with the businesses, with the people from the supply and trading organization, in the front office, in the middle office, in the back office, in the different functions like accounting, finance, getting all of their input and having members of those different departments be part of the transformation team so that they're there every step of the journey. Their input is heard, and they can direct the transformation team in the right direction for the business, and make sure the business is coming along because they're reporting back to people that are in the business as well. So the change management aspect, the whole transformation is really important, but really hard to do well.
Thank you very much. We'll totally agree. Well, here's another question I find quite interesting, particularly in the Latin America culture. The question goes like this: what aspects, according to your experience, should be considered when choosing between an in-house development or a vendor's product selection and implementation? I don't know if you, Mark, maybe want to answer this one.
Yeah, we could talk about that. So if you think about it, as we go through, and we talked about a little bit the process of making sure you have a really strong understanding, as Will kind of highlighted, of what is your overall business context, what's your target operating model, and then what those scenarios are, right? And then we go out there and we start looking at this, hey, what packages can fit this model of my business? Right. And we say, hey, these are the best packages, but the solution will never be, oh, it's all one. It's going to be something that you're going to have some in-house development. You're going to have some off-the-shelf tool type of capabilities. You're going to have those things tightly integrated. And in some cases, you do make the decision, say, hey, I'm better off just building it myself in-house than I am using this package and the cost and the integration and some of those things. But the main thing is that you look at that as a holistic solution of these combinations of things and what your capabilities are that you're going to need to help to support that and really get the total value out of it. So we've done this multiple times. We've had customers that did buy the full package, tried to implement it all as one, the integration with the different components, as well as, in-house development. And we've done a lot of in-house development as well to meet these same needs because of certain niche markets and activities that you're engaging in. Right. So as I said, they all have strengths and weaknesses. That's the whole evaluation process and making sure you have a solution. But back to Will's point, if you don't have that buy-in, you have to have that engagement with the key players, understand that business, and make sure they understand this is the solution I'm going to get, and here's how I'm going to get to where I want to be. Ultimately, we're trying to create more value. We're not trying to just implement tools, right, and enhance the number of applications we've got, right? We want to make sure that the value proposition, how are we going to get the maximized value out of the assets and capabilities that our organization has and where we want to get to. And that's what our focus is throughout the whole thing.
Thank you, Mark. Very, very important concept. It's not about applications. It's about making business.
Right.
Great.
Right.
Well, here's another question. It is. Let me read it. Is it central to focus on services as the basis of the value chain? That's a quite interesting question. I don't know if you, Mark, Will, or Mudit will answer.
Yeah, we can talk a little about that. I mean, when we talk about services, obviously, what are you providing to your customers? What are your customers getting out of you? And that's part of that whole scenario modeling, saying, hey, what we're going to get, because in a lot of cases, especially, we have one customer we were just working with. They do a lot of real custom stuff for their customers. They actually manage somebody else's assets and they manage those kind of things. So their solution looks a little bit different because they need that level of customization, that white glove treatment, if you will, of that customer and how they're going to treat it and how they're going to do things. So services and scenarios kind of go together hand in hand in my mind. When I talk about business models and those things, we'll look at those different services, how you provide them, what you do. And then that also kind of drives you into the TRM package. Does this, gives you data. But then in some cases, you might say, well, I also need this customer portal that makes us provide and make that he can interact with me in different ways. And that goes into that target operating model, as well as how you want to provide the service. And again, how you're going to get the maximized value, either for your customer, for you, and both. And again, that's where the overall focus always has to be, is how do we get the maximized value? How do we get everything we can out of these customers and our assets, and also providing the level of service that we want to provide. I don't know, Rajiv or Will, do you guys want to add to that?
Yeah.
I can add some. So I think for us, we are definitely seeing like where companies are dealing directly with retail customers, just because of the experience they are seeing with like someone like Amazon or some other parties. Their expectations on what they expect from the suppliers are increasing, right? Like they want information at the tip of their fingerprint. They don't want to actually mail someone, call someone to get the information. They want to be able to access it whenever they need it. So there's definitely things like that which are changing the customer behavior, and that in turn is shaping how the suppliers are actually responding to that. That did not used to be the case like 10 years back, but we are seeing a lot of that right now. And it becomes a value-added services. Retail and marketing tends to also be very relationship-driven, value chains. So I think the more you can actually offer that service actually increases your, the friction and the buying centers you have with the customers.
Great. Thank you, Rajiv. You want to introduce yourself? Because
let me just go ahead, Rajiv, and then
sorry, it's Rajiv. I'm part of the energy and commodities practice. Work with Will and Mark.
Thank you very much.
Just one point to add to that, which is, earlier I talked about fossil fuels having to compete in increasingly competitive markets. So one of the ways that that companies may be able to do that is through services and differentiation, because demand's falling is expected to fall faster than supply. And so if you've got a good asset position, if you've got lots of reserves, how do you find a home for that? And so going downstream and getting more surety of a home for your production through value-added services could be one method to do that.
Great, Will. Great, thank you. Well, I have we are just on time. We are going to take just 2 or 3 minutes more, but here's a very interesting question. What is a typical duration of a maturity assessment process, and what axes do you evaluate within a TRM area when you do this? I don't know. Wants to answer? Maybe you will, or Mudit.
Yeah, let me start, and I think Mark can maybe chime in, right? So when you look or consider doing a maturity assessment, you've got to look at a few different axes there, right? You've got to understand your business landscape, right? Some of the services and scenarios that Mark and Will just spoke about, right? Organizations evolve, business models evolve. You may be considering looking at newer commodities and so on, right? So having an assessment of that is important. And then followed by your capabilities, right? That Mark covered in the presentation earlier. Which business capabilities do you have in-house, where your strengths are? And within that, the maturity of the teams, right? Your accounting team, traders, maturity of the trading function, the scheduling function, right? So the capability assessment is a very strong component of that, both from an organizational structure standpoint as well as a training standpoint, right? And then you move beyond into the system side of things, right? Starting with your entire architecture, right? Is it on premise? It is a hybrid? Is it on the cloud? Do you want to move towards the cloud? What's the end state that you're looking at? How much of your systems are integrated well? What's the level of automation? And finally, data, right? Data is very important. We've touched upon it in this presentation a few times. What is the source of that data? How is it sitting? How is it moving across systems? Are you replicating data at multiple points? Is there an efficiency that could be gained there, right? So those are some of the primary axes that one looks at in a maturity assessment. It's a relatively short exercise, anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how intensive a company wants to. And beyond that, you can then prioritize and figure out what your transformation roadmap looks like if you want to move up the maturity curve in any or all of those axes, right?
Great. Thank you, Mudit. Well, we are just in time. I don't know if Shrikant, I invite you to show us the last slide with the contact information. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, that's it. Great. Thank you, everybody. I will turn to Spanish again. Muchas gracias a todos los
Thank you so much, everyone, for participating in this seminar, to participate and being interested in this topic and by connecting. So up to this point, we are at your disposal. We have here the contact information, and we are going to be happy to receive any question or anything that you want to mention or any follow-up that you want, that due to the time constraints, we weren't able to answer all of the questions. We will send that to each one of our speakers. And thank you so much once again. And thank you to Mundit, Willie, Will, Mark, and Rushid for the participation and the creation of this seminar. Thank you. See you soon.